It happened 3 weeks before Christmas. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother that would change everything. "Olivia, you're too negative to be around this year. We need peace. Don't come for Christmas." Just like that, no call, no explanation, just a sentence that landed like a verdict. I stared at the screen while the snow fell heavy outside my apartment window in Boulder. The message didn't sound like her, or maybe it did, and I was only now admitting that to myself. I waited for another text, some kind of softening, a heart emoji, anything. But nothing came. The chat went silent. The silence hurt more than the words. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was just in one of her moods again, the ones that came after she'd spent too much time around my sister Emily, who believed every problem could be fixed with a filter and a caption. But as I scrolled up through the messages, I saw the family chat name had changed from Mary Martin's to Holiday Magic. My name was missing. No one had added me back. The shared photo drive was gone too. I clicked the old link out of habit and saw the same red notice flash across my screen. Access denied. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. The room was warm, but my hands were cold. I turned my phone face down, hoping the gesture would make the sting fade. Outside carolers passed below, their voices rising in cheerful harmony that didn't reach me. I used to love this season, the lights, the smell of pine, the sound of laughter spilling from the kitchen, while my mother stirred her famous spiced cider. But now all I could hear was that line, "You're too negative to be around." I wasn't negative. I was tired. Tired of being the one who kept everything from falling apart. Tired of paying for the mortgage on the mountain house that she now called hers. Tired of pretending that my silence was peace. I made the mistake of scrolling through social media. There it was, my mother's latest post. A photo of her and Emily standing in front of the house I had designed, and paid for, the caption reading, "Grateful for a home filled with light and love." Light and love. I laughed under my breath, the sound sharp. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere, though the comments were full of praise for her generosity. Someone wrote, "You deserve everything, Diana." And she replied, "Thank you. We've built this together as a family." Together. I closed the app. The memory of the signing day came back with perfect clarity. My mother's voice had been soft, almost casual. "Just help me get approved for the mortgage, sweetheart. Once I get back on my feet, we'll transfer the title to both of us." I had believed her because back then I still wanted to. I had paid the down payment, covered every installment since, and when she redecorated last spring, I let her put it all on my credit card. I told myself it was love. That's what daughters do. Now she had decided I was too negative, too serious. The truth was, I had always been the one who asked the questions that ruined her fairy tale image. When the bills came late, I asked why. When Emily borrowed money for her content business, I asked when she'd pay it back. And every time my mother would sigh and say, "Olivia, not everything has to be a fight." Maybe she was right. Maybe it didn't have to be a fight. Maybe it was time for something quieter. The clock on the wall ticked steady and indifferent. I picked up my mug, took a sip of coffee, and found it cold. I poured it into the sink and watched the brown swirl disappear. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the soft whoosh of wind outside. I thought about the house, the one nestled at the foot of the Flatirons, the one she now filled with guest laughter and curated smiles, the house still under my name. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen washed over the room, pale and sterile. My folder labeled Home sat in the corner of the desktop. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside were copies of the mortgage contract, tax documents, repair invoices, everything I had ever paid for. My name appeared at the top of every page, neat and undeniable. I scrolled through the files slowly, as if reacquainting myself with something I had lost. I could see the entire timeline of our relationship written in those numbers. Each payment proof of my loyalty. Each expense a small piece of my silence. A year ago I had been standing in that same kitchen she now posted online. I arrived late after a long project deadline carrying a casserole dish still hot from the oven. Emily had laughed, holding her phone up to record. "Look who finally decided to show up," she said, her followers cheering through live comments. My mother smiled for the camera, but not for me. "You're always so dramatic, Liv," she said later when I told her I didn't like being filmed. "Can't you lighten up for once, lighten up?" Too negative. Same melody, different lyrics. I closed the laptop and stood by the window. Snowflakes pressed against the glass, melting into small rivers that caught the reflection of the streetlights. Across the way, a family was decorating their tree. I could see the father holding his little girl on his shoulders as she placed the star on top. They laughed when it tilted sideways. The sound carried faintly across the street, pure and unguarded. I turned away before the ache in my chest could deepen. My apartment was neat, almost sterile. A single plant on the windowsill. A couch too big for one person. The absence of holiday decorations made the space look like a waiting room. I had planned to visit the mountain house next week to help set up to hang lights on the porch like every year. Now there would be no trip, no welcome, no place to belong. Still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger takes energy, and I had none left. What I felt instead was clarity, the kind that comes when the noise stops. For the first time in a long while, I could see things as they were. I went to the kitchen, refilled my mug with hot water, and let the steam fog my glasses. My reflection in the microwave door looked unfamiliar, calm but detached, like someone watching her own life from a distance. I sat back down and opened my laptop again, this time not the home folder. I clicked the browser and typed property law Boulder, Colorado co-ownership claim. Search results filled the screen. One link caught my eye: Anderson and Bloom Law Offices, specializing in real estate disputes and asset recovery. My hand hesitated for a moment before clicking. A contact form appeared. I hovered over the blank fields, my pulse steady, my breath even. Name, email, brief description. Under description I typed, "I need legal advice regarding a property I purchased with my mother. I am the sole title holder, but she resides there exclusively. She has recently banned me from access." I hit send. The message confirmation appeared in blue text. "Thank you for reaching out. Attorney Paul Anderson will contact you within 24 hours. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the words. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere in that mountain house, I imagined my mother pouring another cup of cider, laughing with Emily about how I'd overreacted again. They always thought I'd just swallow it, move on, keep paying. But not this time. For once, I wasn't going to argue, beg, or explain. I was simply going to do what they never expected. The house they called home still belonged to me. And now, for the first time, I intended to take it back. The next morning, the world outside my window was pale and still. Snow covered every parked car, every branch, every inch of the street below. Inside, my apartment was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts sound loud. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, half expecting another message to appear on my phone. It didn't. When I finally reached for it, the screen was blank. No texts, no calls. Nothing from my mother or Emily. The group chat that used to buzz every December with recipes and arguments over gift exchanges remained silent. I set the phone back down face up this time and listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The air felt heavy with the echo of last night's message, those 8 words that had redrawn the boundaries of my life. "You're too negative to be around this year." I whispered them out loud, testing how they sounded in daylight. They didn't sting any less. They just sounded absurd, detached, like something you'd read in an article about toxic positivity. I made coffee and sat by the window. The world outside looked soft, forgiving. Inside, everything was sharp. The heat from the mug seeped into my fingers, but my chest stayed cold. I thought about all the Christmas mornings before, the smell of cinnamon rolls, the sound of wrapping paper, tearing, my mother's laughter echoing through the house. Then my mind wandered to last year, the first time I felt something shift. It had started with a joke. Emily had been filming a family holiday vlog for her followers. I'd walked in late after finishing a client project that had run past its deadline, still in my work clothes. Emily turned the camera toward me and said, "Look who finally decided to join us." Everyone laughed. I did too, but it was the kind of laugh that hides discomfort behind politeness. Later that night, she uploaded the video with the caption, "Even serious sisters have Christmas spirit sometimes." I saw it hours later, hundreds of comments deep. Some called me the grumpy one. One person wrote, "She looks like she hates being there." The next day, I mentioned it quietly to my mother while we were cleaning up. She sighed without looking up from the sink. "Oh, Liv, you always make things bigger than they are. Try to lighten up." That phrase, lighten up, had become her favorite way to shut me down. Now, as I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt toast, I realized that moment had been a rehearsal for this silence. I had mistaken cruelty for humor, dismissal for love. I opened my laptop, scrolling through old emails without purpose. The subject lines blurred together: mortgage confirmation, payment received, utility bill. Each one a reminder of the quiet backbone I'd provided. 4 years of automatic withdrawals. I clicked on one at random. The number sat there, neat and precise, as if math could capture sacrifice. My mother had promised to take over the payments once she was back on her feet. She never did. I thought about all the times she'd called me responsible, reliable, words that once felt like compliments, but now sounded like chains. The truth was simple: I had become convenient. The snow outside grew heavier flakes, swirling like slow confessions. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and watched a child build a small snowman on the sidewalk. He laughed when it fell apart, then started over. I envied him. The simplicity of rebuilding without bitterness. My phone buzzed, suddenly startling me. For a split second, I thought it might be her. Instead, it was a reminder from my bank about the upcoming mortgage draft. I stared at the notification, the irony almost cruel. Here I was, banned from Christmas in a house I paid for. I tapped dismiss and whispered, "Not for long." I spent the rest of the morning cleaning the apartment, more to move than to think. The act of sweeping, folding, scrubbing it gave my hands purpose when my heart didn't know what to do. By noon, the sun had vanished behind thick gray clouds. I made another pot of coffee I didn't really want. A soft knock interrupted the monotony. When I opened the door, Mrs. Grant from 2 doors down stood there, wrapped in her oversized scarf. She was in her 70s, with kind eyes and a voice like warm honey. "Just checking if you're keeping warm, dear," she said, holding a small tin of cookies. I smiled, surprised. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said simply, "but sometimes people need a reminder that they're seen." She handed me the tin, her gloved fingers brushing mine. "Don't let anyone take your peace, not even family." Her words caught me off guard, cutting through the fog in my head. I nodded, unsure what to say. After she left, I stood in the doorway for a while, the cold air from the hall biting at my arms. Then I closed the door gently and leaned against it. For a moment, I just listened to the quiet again. The refrigerator hum, the tick of the clock, my own breathing. It didn't sound empty anymore. It sounded clean. I carried the cookies to the table, poured a cup of tea, and sat down. I imagined my mother at that exact moment, probably decorating the tree with Emily, their laughter filling the rooms I had built for them. The thought didn't hurt as much as it should have. It just felt distant, like watching a movie you've already seen too many times. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through old messages. My mother's tone through the years had changed, like the weather: affectionate, then neutral, then transactional. "Can you transfer this month's amount?" "Don't worry, I'll handle the taxes later. You always worry too much." It was all there, the gradual erasure disguised as routine. At the bottom of the thread was last night's message. I read it again, then locked the screen. I wasn't going to reply. I opened a notebook instead, the same one I used for project sketches. On a blank page, I wrote in small letters, "Mortgage, utilities, property tax, insurance." then below it who actually pays. The pen pressed hard enough to leave an imprint on the next page. I stared at the list, the simplicity of it almost comforting. This was no longer about emotion. It was about truth. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking loose the last bits of snow from the trees. The streetlight flickered on, even though it was only mid-afternoon. I wrapped myself in a blanket and watched through the window as neighbors carried grocery bags and wrapped gifts. Inside, the warmth from the radiator hummed softly against the glass. I remembered how my mother used to say, "Family is about showing up no matter what." I used to believe her. Now I understood that showing up meant nothing if you were only invited to serve, not to belong. When the phone rang again, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID flashed Anderson and Bloom-Law. My breath caught. I had filled out their contact form late last night and then tried not to think about it. I hesitated, then picked up. A calm voice greeted me. "Miss Martin, this is Paul Anderson. I received your message regarding the property." "Yes," I said quietly. "Would you be available to come in tomorrow afternoon? 2 p.m. works on my end?" "That's fine. Bring any documents you have, mortgage agreements, tax records, anything in your name." "I will." He paused, his tone softening. "I'm sorry this is happening to you right before the holidays." I managed a small, humorless laugh. "It's fine. I've stopped waiting for holidays to feel like family." After we hung up, I sat there, phone still in my hand. A strange calm settled over me. The kind that follows a storm when the debris is still scattered, but the air finally clears. I looked around the room, the half-drunk mug, the folded blanket, the notebook open on the table. For the first time, everything looked exactly as it was, no illusions, no noise. When I walked back to the window, the sky had turned darker streaks of lavender, fading into gray. I watched the snow fall in slow spirals, thinking of how it covers everything, evenly beautiful, silent, merciless. I whispered to the empty room they wanted peace. So do I. Just not the kind they meant. On the counter, the tin of cookies from Mrs. Grant sat unopened. I reached for one, broke it in half, and smiled faintly. The sweetness tasted foreign but good. Before heading to bed, I gathered the mortgage papers from the drawer and placed them neatly in a folder labeled Home. Tomorrow I would carry them to Paul's office. The clock struck midnight. The hum of the heater filled the space where the ache used to be. If I was too negative for them, I murmured, turning off the light, then maybe it's time they learned what my silence really means. The next afternoon, the city was still blanketed in white, the kind of cold that made every breath visible. I parked outside a small building downtown, its windows fogged from the heat inside. The sign read Anderson and Bloom Law Offices. For a long moment, I sat in the car watching my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked calm, but my pulse betrayed me. When I finally stepped inside, the warmth hit me all at once. The faint smell of coffee mingled with the clean scent of paper and pine-scented candles. A woman at the front desk smiled politely. "You must be Miss Martin. Mr. Anderson is expecting you." She led me down a short hallway to an office with large windows overlooking the frozen street. Paul Anderson stood to greet me. He was in his 40s, tall, with a stillness that felt deliberate. "Olivia," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but let's see what we can do." I sat across from him at a wooden desk, polished to a mirror shine. My folder felt heavy in my hands. I slid it toward him, the paper inside rustling like distant thunder. He opened it carefully and began flipping through the documents. "This is the mortgage agreement," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And these are the payment records, utilities, insurance, property taxes, all under my name." Paul nodded, eyes scanning each line with quiet focus. "And the house currently occupied by your mother, yes. She's been living there full-time for 4 years. I helped her buy it. She couldn't qualify for the loan on her own." He leaned back slightly, hands folded. "You co-signed." "No," I said. "I'm the only one on the deed. She's listed as resident. I paid everything." That made him look up. His tone shifted, calmer but with an edge of precision. then legally, it's yours. Every cent you've paid is on record. She has no ownership, no claim to the property beyond residence. The words sank into me slowly, like heat thawing frozen ground. I had known it deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone else made it real. For years, I'd felt powerless in a house that legally belonged to me. Paul continued. If you choose, you can reclaim the property. We'd file a repossession notice and notify the bank. It's a clean case, Miss Martin. I swallowed. And she'd have to leave. Yes. Within a court-defined period. It's not about eviction, it's about restoring rightful ownership. I nodded, though part of me felt hollow. I never thought it would come to this. Paul gave a small, knowing smile. It usually doesn't until someone's pushed too far. I stared at the papers spread between us. Numbers, dates, signatures, evidence of all the invisible work I'd done to keep that house alive. Every bill I paid, every sacrifice I justified as love. He slid one of the pages toward me, tapping his pen against a line near the top. Here, title holder Olivia Martin. It's right there. You've carried the full financial load and the legal right. If they've implied otherwise, that's misrepresentation. The word made me flinch. Misrepresentation. It sounded clinical, almost polite, but it meant something crueler. Lies built on my trust. Paul looked at me closely. You don't need to decide now, but if you'd like, I can prepare the paperwork. I hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the desk. Through the window, snowflakes drifted past like feathers. How soon would it take effect? Once filed, it becomes official within 48 hours. The bank and county will confirm the transfer of possession. 48 hours, 2 days to change everything. I'll do it, I said quietly. Let's start. Paul nodded once and began gathering the papers. His movements were efficient, professional. You'll need to sign these forms and email me copies of the most recent utility bills. I'll handle the rest. I signed where he pointed the pen, scratching softly against the paper. Each signature felt like an incision, precise, deliberate. When it was done, I leaned back, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Paul smiled faintly. You're making a smart decision, Olivia. This isn't about revenge. It's about balance. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore, I murmured. Afterward, I stopped at a cafe a few blocks away. It was quiet inside, the kind of place that served coffee in real cups and played jazz from a hidden speaker. I sat near the window, watching people hurry past, bundled in scarves and hats, each one moving towards some version of warmth. My hands still trembled when I reached for the cup. I kept seeing the line on that document, title holder Olivia Martin. It looked so simple on paper. I thought back to the day my mother had first asked for help buying the house. She had just finalized her divorce, her voice trembling when she said, I just need a stable place, Liv. Something that's mine. I'd said yes immediately. I hadn't even hesitated. The day we signed, she'd smiled at the banker and said, We're doing this together. The banker smiled back, unaware that together really meant her name on the loan, my money behind it. I remember that first winter vividly. She called me almost every evening, asking how to pay the bills online, asking which account to use. I'd stayed up late, making sure everything cleared on time. At first I was proud. It felt good to help her to keep things running smoothly. But slowly the gratitude faded from her voice. Requests became expectations. The last time I brought up money 2 years ago, she'd looked at me with irritation. You always make things so transactional, Olivia. Family doesn't keep score. But I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping the lights on. I stared into my coffee, its surface rippling from the tremor in my hand. The irony burned. I'd been erased emotionally while funding their comfort. I was the invisible scaffolding behind their perfect image. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of the thought. A new notification, Emily's latest post. I clicked it before I could stop myself. There she was, standing beside my mother, both smiling in front of the fireplace. The caption read, Christmas Eve at Mom's dream home, nothing but love and light. The photo glowed with filters and fairy lights. In the background, I recognized the chandelier I had picked, the one I'd spent hours choosing from catalogs. Beneath the photo, comments flooded in. Such a beautiful home. You two are goals, family. Is everything. I closed the app and sat still. The cafe's window reflected my face back at me, expressionless, quiet, but steady. They built a story on my silence, I whispered to myself. I'm done being the background. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, erasing footprints on the sidewalk. I finished my coffee and stood to leave. When I got home, I cleared the table and spread out all the documents again: mortgage, utilities, tax records, insurance. I arranged them neatly in rows the way I did with blueprints at work. Each page represented another piece of what I had carried alone. I opened a new folder on my computer and titled it Reclaim. One by one, I scanned and saved every file, naming each according to the date and type. The folder grew, lines of digital proof stacking like quiet witnesses. The clock ticked past 9. I looked at the window where snow pressed softly against the glass. The world outside was silent, almost serene. I felt something inside me mirror that stillness, a calm I hadn't known in years. Before bed, I sent an email to Paul with all the attachments and a short message: documents attached. Proceed as discussed. I hovered over the send button for a moment, my hand steady. Then I pressed it. The little whoosh sound from the computer was oddly satisfying, the kind of sound that marked an ending and a beginning at once. I turned off the lamp, letting the room dim into the blue of winter night. As I lay down, I could still see the reflection of the snow outside, the world clean, untouched, new. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like someone about to reclaim something she should never have lost. That night, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by neat piles of paper. The sound of the wind outside scraped faintly against the window, and the only light came from the small lamp beside me. My apartment felt like an archive, each document, each receipt a quiet confession of the life I'd been financing. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned out and left something sharper behind focus. I opened my laptop and began going through my financial folders. The numbers appeared in calm, predictable columns: mortgage, insurance, gas, electricity. I clicked into the mortgage account first. Payment history: 48 consecutive transactions, every one of them withdrawn from my checking account. I scrolled until my eyes blurred, the pattern unbroken. My mother hadn't contributed once after that first month. Leaning back, I rubbed my temples. 4 years of steady payments while she called it our house. Every party she hosted, every dinner she bragged about online, all built on those transactions. I opened the utilities tab next. Gas, water, internet, all auto-paid under my name. I clicked through each account until I reached the one for electricity. A note flashed at the bottom: primary account, holder Olivia Martin. Contact person, Diana Martin. I stared at that line for a long time. She'd added her name for correspondence, but never touched the bills themselves. My jaw tightened as I copied the statement to a folder labeled Frozen Accounts. The folder name looked almost poetic. The longer I looked at those documents, the clearer the timeline became. Each line item carried a memory. The $218 payment in June, right before she bought new patio furniture and posted, "Nothing feels better than earning your own space." The $340 winter heating bill, paid 2 days before she threw Emily's engagement party at the house. I remembered driving up that weekend, balancing boxes of wine and catering trays, watching her greet guests with a glass in hand and say, "We built this home together." No one questioned her. Why would they? She was charming. I was invisible. I printed the receipts one by one until the stack grew thick under my hand. The smell of ink filled the room. It was strange how something as sterile as paperwork could make the air feel heavy. At midnight, I stopped and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the kitchen window looked older, more certain. Behind me, the piles of documents stood like silent witnesses. I turned back to the laptop and began sorting the files into subfolders. mortgage, utilities, insurance, taxes. Each folder got its own label, precise and clean. I highlighted them all and dragged them into frozen accounts. Watching the files slide across the screen felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. Halfway through, I stumbled on a folder I hadn't opened in years: home photos. My cursor hovered for a moment before I clicked. The thumbnails loaded slowly. My breath caught. There they were, images of the house under renovation. My mother standing in the kitchen, grinning with paint on her hands. Emily taking selfies in front of the new fireplace. Every caption on the old shared drive said, "Our project, our dream home." In one photo, my mother was holding a check from the contractor. I zoomed in. My signature was on it. The irony stung, but I didn't flinch. I simply dragged the folder into proof. Scrolling deeper, I found a picture of the finished living room. The chandelier sparkled above the table, the same one I'd spent hours choosing. I could still remember her voice when I'd called to ask if she liked it. "It's fine, Liv," she had said. "You always pick things that look expensive." Now looking at it, I realized expensive was the only language she respected. I copied the photos into the evidence folder, renamed them by date, and moved on. Around 1 in the morning, I opened my email to double-check receipts. That's when I found something I hadn't seen before: a thread between my mother and Emily. The subject line read, "Refinance Inquiry." It must have been forwarded accidentally years ago. I clicked it open. The message was short. "From Diana Martin to Emily Cole, don't tell Liv about the refinance offer. The less she knows, the better. She'll only make it complicated." Below it, Emily had replied, "I won't. She's too negative to help anyway." I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Then I printed the thread and slid it under the other documents. "So this was never about peace," I whispered. "It was about control." The heater clicked on behind me, startling me with its warmth. I stood, letting the hum fill the silence. For a while, I just walked through the apartment, papers in hand, my thoughts steady and slow. The years of small humiliations lined up in my head every time I'd been told I was too serious, too controlling, too cold. Every moment when they made me question my worth just to keep me paying. I returned to the table and started another stack labeled Communications. The email went on top. A ping broke the quiet. A text from an unfamiliar number. "Hey Liv, it's Jake. Not sure if you remember me. Worked on the wiring in your mom's house last winter. Found something when I backed up the house line. Thought you might want it." Attached was an audio file. "Living room, December, MP3. My stomach tightened. I hesitated, then clicked play. The recording was faint, at first filled with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter. Then my mother's voice, unmistakable even through the static. "Liv doesn't need to know how we manage the money," she said. "She's too serious to enjoy it anyway." Emily's voice followed, sharper, teasing. "She's useful, Mom. That's all that matters." Another voicemail, probably my uncle, added, "She's the responsible one. Every family needs one to pay the bills." Laughter erupted, muffled, but cruel. The clip ended abruptly. I sat there frozen. The room felt smaller. My pulse thudded in my ears, each beat louder than the last. I replayed the recording. This time I didn't cry. I wrote down the timestamp 0047 and saved the file to frozen accounts. For a long moment, I simply stared at the folder. Dozens of icons filled the screen, each one a shard of proof, each one undeniable. I highlighted them all and created a duplicate on an external drive. When I opened my email again, Paul's message sat waiting. "Please send any additional documentation for the case." I attached the folder and typed back. "You'll find everything we discussed plus one new piece. Listen closely at 0047. Then I pressed send. The whoosh of the outgoing mail sounded final, like a door closing. I poured myself another glass of water, though my hands shook enough to spill some on the counter. I wiped it away, slow and deliberate. It was almost 3 a.m. when I finished organizing everything. My apartment was still the street outside, completely silent. I looked at the folders one last time, each document now an act of liberation. I whispered into the quiet. They said I was too negative. Maybe I just saw the truth before anyone else did. Then I powered off the laptop and turned toward the window. Snow was falling again, soft and endless, covering every trace of the night before. Somewhere up in that mountain house, they were probably asleep, wrapped in the comfort my money had built. They wouldn't know it yet, but the balance had already shifted. I stood there until the first gray light of dawn crept into the room. In a few days, the papers Paul filed would take effect. The systems they took for granted would stop working. And when the lights finally went out, I wouldn't need to be there to see it. For now, there was nothing left to do but breathe and wait. The day after the recording arrived, the city woke under a gray sky. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel tired either. My mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in years. The silence in the apartment wasn't heavy anymore. It was controlled, deliberate, like a pause I finally owned. I made coffee and sat at the table watching the steam curl upward. The cup felt warm against my palms, steadying. The email from Paul came in just after 8. Got the files. Strong evidence. I'll move forward with the official notice this afternoon. He added a line at the end that made me smile faintly. You're remarkably organized, Miss Martin. I've rarely seen someone build a case so quietly. Quiet. That was the word everyone used for me, always half as praise, half as criticism. Now it felt like power. I replied with 2 words, thank you. When I closed the laptop, my reflection hovered on the dark screen, a version of me I barely recognized. The woman staring back wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. She wasn't explaining or apologizing. She was finished with both. Outside, the snow had turned to slush gray at the edges, melting into thin rivers down the sidewalk. I watched a delivery truck pull up across the street and thought of all the packages I'd sent to that mountain house over the years. Furniture, linens, the new dining set. My mother claimed she found online. I remembered wrapping gifts and labeling them carefully, making sure everything arrived before Christmas morning. I'd done everything right, and still I'd been cut out. By noon, I opened my bank app and began reviewing the accounts. I wasn't there to freeze them yet, not today, but I needed to see it all one more time to remind myself that every payment was traceable, lawful mine. I scrolled through the automatic withdrawals, the same names repeating month after month: Carolina Gas, Mountain Electric, Duke Insurance, County Tax Services. Each one felt like a receipt for betrayal. I clicked the top account, and the word primary holder appeared beside my name again. I took a screenshot and saved it under the growing folder titled Frozen Accounts. The file count reached 71. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered, "Is this Olivia Martin?" The voice on the other end was polite, rehearsed. "Yes, it is. This is Jordan from North Peak Realty. We received a request from your lawyer to update ownership status on your property. Just confirming you're aware." "I am," understood, he said. "The change will go through within 48 hours. Congratulations, Miss Martin. It's good to see ownership restored to where it belongs." "Thank you," I said quietly, meaning it more than he knew. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair. 48 hours. 2 days and the title would legally reflect what had always been true. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through older messages. Buried deep in my email were dozens of small requests from my mother over the years. "Can you transfer for the insurance the card didn't go through? Could you cover the repairs? We'll figure it out later." Later had never come. Scrolling through those messages felt like replaying a slow undoing. With each line, I saw how she'd built comfort on my compliance, and I had let her because it felt like love. I stopped at one email dated from the Christmas before last. Subject: tree delivery. "Liv, could you order the new artificial tree online, the one with pre-lit branches? I'll pay you back after the holidays." Promise. She never did. The price tag was still in my online cart history. I closed the tab and let my hand rest against the table. The house I had paid for, the lights I had kept glowing. It all came down to a single lie, repeated in different forms. You're part of this family, just not enough to be seen. By late afternoon, the sky dimmed. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and stepped outside for the first time in days. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes every nerve. I walked without direction, my boots crunching over patches of ice. At a small bookstore on the corner, I stopped to warm up. The owner, a woman in her 60s, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Cold out there today, huh?" "Freezing," I said, shaking snow from my scarf. She poured herself a cup of tea and offered, "You look like someone carrying a decision." The comment caught me off guard. "I guess I am." She nodded as though that was all the explanation she needed. Big decisions always come when the snow's falling. People think the world stops, but it just gets quieter so you can hear yourself. Her words lingered as I browsed the shelves. I picked up a small notebook with a gray linen cover. The words on the front read, "Begin again." Without thinking, I bought it. Back home, I sat at the table and opened it to the first page. I didn't plan to write anything dramatic, just the truth, the kind that didn't need to be spoken aloud. December 20th. Today I stopped asking why they did it. They did it because they could. Because I let them. That ends now. I put down the pen and let the words settle. That evening I turned on the small string of lights I kept over the window. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that Christmas didn't belong to them anymore. I brewed a cup of tea and sat quietly as the city lights blinked against the snow. Around 8, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Mom's freaking out. What did you tell the lawyer?" It was Emily. My stomach didn't twist this time. I typed back everything that was mine. A moment later, "You're being cruel." I stared at the screen for a long time, then wrote, "I'm just being fair." I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I opened Paul's email again. The legal notice he drafted was attached as a PDF marked pending review. I opened it, scanning through each line. The words were dry, formal, but powerful. The property located at 215 Willow Ridge Drive, currently occupied by Diana Martin, is hereby subject to repossession under the authority of the title holder, Olivia Martin. My name, my property. At the bottom of the document, a signature field waited. I clicked it, typed my full name, and pressed submit. The confirmation window popped up. Your digital signature has been recorded. Your filing is complete. I sat there for several minutes, letting the quiet stretch across the room. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was relief. The kind that comes when something finally stops weighing you down. I walked to the window, watching the snow fall again under the streetlights. The flakes landed softly against the glass, dissolving into small, perfect circles. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. I thought of my mother and Emily, probably wrapping gifts, planning their perfect holiday dinner, never guessing that their version of our home was already dissolving like the snow on the glass. The clock on the wall read 10:42. I made another cup of tea, stronger this time. As the water boiled, I whispered into the quiet. "You called me negative. Maybe you were right. But negativity sees the cracks before the walls collapse." When the kettle clicked off, I poured the tea and carried it to the window. Outside, the world was wrapped in white silence, untouched. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt inevitable. The next morning began with a kind of stillness that felt staged, like the world was holding its breath. My email notifications sat unread for nearly an hour before I gathered the nerve to check them. The first was from Paul. "The court filing has been processed. The notice will be delivered to the property within 48 hours. The bank has confirmed the ownership transfer is pending your final verification." I reread the message twice, letting each word register. It was happening. The silence that had followed me all these months was finally working in my favor. I clicked the verification link, signed my name again, and pressed confirm. A green checkmark appeared at the top of the page. I sat back and exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my shoulders like air from a balloon. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. I poured a cup of coffee and carried it to the window, the heat fogging up the glass for a moment. Outside, the world looked washed, clean, thick snow melting into the gutters, the trees heavy with ice. A delivery truck rolled down the street, tires crunching over frozen slush. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone to see if my mother needed something. I wasn't waiting for another guilt-laced message about money or travel plans. I wasn't waiting to be useful. I opened my laptop again, this time to my banking dashboard. The balance looked ordinary, but the quiet beneath it was extraordinary. No automatic drafts hanging over my head, no payments waiting to go out. I clicked pause autopay on every account related to the house, gas, water, electricity, property tax. Each confirmation email landed in my inbox like the sound of a latch locking. A soft knock startled me. When I opened the door, Mrs. Grant stood there again, wrapped in her thick coat, holding a small jar of soup. "You look tired, dear," she said, her eyes kind but sharp. "Soup helps when the mind's running faster than the heart." I smiled faintly. "How do you always know?" she chuckled. "Because I was once where you are learning that sometimes peace doesn't come from winning, but from walking away." Her words settled deep. "I think I'm starting to understand that." "Good," she said, handing me the jar. "Now go easy on yourself." People who've spent years being strong often forget they're allowed to rest. When she left, I warmed the soup and sat at the table, letting the scent of garlic and thyme fill the air. I ate slowly, feeling the weight in my chest ease bit by bit. Mrs. Grant had a way of saying things that made me feel both small and safe, like the world wasn't as cruel as I sometimes believed. By mid-afternoon, I opened my email again. There was a new message from Paul. "The notice has been accepted. Delivery scheduled for December 22nd, 3:00 p.m. Expect official confirmation after it's served." I stared at the date. 2 days before Christmas Eve. The timing felt poetic, almost too neat, as if life had waited for the perfect stage. I typed back, "Thank you. Please keep me informed." Then I sat still, fingers resting on the keyboard, wondering what they would do when the envelope arrived. For years, I'd imagined confronting my mother face to face, telling her everything she had done, everything I had carried for her. But now the idea felt unnecessary. Words wouldn't make her understand. Silence would. I closed the laptop and turned on the small radio by the counter. A Christmas song played softly, something old and sentimental. Normally, I'd have switched it off, but this time, I let it play. The irony didn't hurt, it soothed. Later that evening, I took a walk. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible. Houses along the street glowed with colored lights and inflatable Santas. Families moved inside shadows, crossing behind curtains. It looked like a postcard, perfect, harmless. Yet I couldn't help wondering how many of those windows hid their own quiet wars. When I came back, I made tea and opened the notebook I'd bought at the bookstore. The page from yesterday stared back at me. Today, I stopped asking why they did it. I turned to a new page and wrote, "Today I stopped apologizing for seeing clearly." The words looked solid, like they belonged there. A notification chimed from my phone. Emily's name appeared again. "Mom's been crying all day," the bank called. "What's going on, Liv?" I read it, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I typed back, "Tell her to check the mailbox tomorrow." 3 dots appeared as she typed. "You can't be serious. It's Christmas." "Exactly," I wrote. "And for once, I'm giving myself the gift." This time, she didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the table and took a long sip of tea. The warmth spread through me, slowly matching the calm in my chest. The old version of me would have felt guilt by now, panic even. But there was none. Just quiet assurance. Before bed, I logged into my email one more time. Paul had sent the digital confirmation of the filing, a scanned document with a county stamp at the top. Beneath the seal was my name printed in bold. Property ownership, Olivia Martin. I traced the words with my fingers, smiling faintly. Not joy, not pride, something steadier. The kind of peace that comes when truth no longer has to fight for space. The next morning I woke before sunrise. The world outside was blue and still the light of early dawn sliding over the rooftops. I made coffee and sat by the window again, notebook open beside me. The first sip was bitter but grounding. I thought of all the Christmas mornings I'd spent rushing, buying gifts, cooking meals, arriving late, because I'd been finishing work. This year there was nothing to rush toward, and for once that felt like freedom. A buzz from my phone broke the stillness. It was Paul again. Delivery complete. Notice received at 2:57 p.m. per courier log. You're officially protected. Congratulations. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It was done. Official, legal, irreversible. Outside, the sun had just cleared the horizon, painting the snow in gold. I took another sip of coffee and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. In the distance, church bells began to ring soft, deliberate, the sound stretching through the quiet morning air. I stood by the window listening. The bells didn't sound like celebration. They sounded like closure. I whispered to the empty room. They called me negative. Maybe that's what happens when you finally stop pretending things are fine. Then I closed the notebook, turned off my phone, and let the light of the new day fill the room. For the first time in years, Christmas was coming, and it didn't feel like loss. It felt like clarity. The night before Christmas Eve settled over the city like a sheet of glass, smooth, cold, unbroken. The clock on my wall blinked 12:30, its red digits slicing through the dark. I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread around me in clean stacks. The air smelled faintly of coffee and snow. My fingers traced the edge of the folder marked frozen accounts. The laptop screen glowed against the quiet. I opened my bank portal, the familiar blue interface waiting. Each account lined up neatly like soldiers, mortgage, gas, electricity, internet, insurance. My heart beat slow and steady. There was no hesitation left in me. I clicked on the mortgage account first. The button at the bottom read Options. I hovered over it for a long moment, breathing evenly, then clicked. A drop-down menu appeared. Pause payments. Suspend account. Close autopay. The words looked harmless, almost soft. I pressed suspend account. A message popped up. Are you sure you want to freeze this account? Yes, I thought, completely sure. I typed my password and hit confirm. The small green check mark appeared, and I exhaled. The first thread had been cut. Next was electricity. The power that kept their lights bright, their dinners warm, their music playing long into the night. I clicked through the same series of confirmations. Suspend service effective December 24th at 6:00 p.m. The number glowed like a countdown. The gas account followed, then water, then internet. With each confirmation email that landed in my inbox, I felt something loosen inside me. It wasn't vengeance, it was alignment, a restoration of balance. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair, the room bathed in the pale blue light of the screen. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, calm, unsmiling but certain. A knock startled me. It was soft, almost hesitant. I rose and opened the door to find Mrs. Grant bundled in her winter coat, her silver hair escaping from under her knitted hat. Couldn't sleep either, she asked with a gentle smile. I stepped aside to let her in, something like that. She carried a small thermos and 2 mugs. I made chamomile tea. Thought you might need company. We sat at the table, steam curling between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of the wind pressing against the windows filled the silence. You remind me of myself, she said at last, her voice low and steady. Years ago, I left my husband after 30 years. Everyone thought I was heartless. But they didn't see the years I spent being erased. I looked at her, surprised by the confession. How did you know it was time? She smiled sadly, when the silence started feeling safer than their company. Her words settled deep like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. I did something tonight, I said quietly. Mrs. Grant didn't ask what, she just nodded. Sometimes peace needs action, dear. Don't let anyone tell you different. She stayed a little while longer, talking about her garden, her late husband, the way she'd learned to fill quiet evenings with small joys. When she finally left, she touched my hand gently. "Peace looks good on you, Olivia." After she was gone, the apartment felt softer, lighter. I poured the leftover tea into my mug and carried it to the window. The street outside was empty except for the faint shimmer of falling snow. Each flake caught the streetlight for a second before vanishing. I pressed my palm to the glass. The cold stung, but it steadied me. Every snowflake melts, I thought, but while it lasts, it changes the world it touches. The heater clicked on and I turned back to the table. My phone buzzed a message from Paul. "All systems confirmed. Court filings and freezes have been processed. The accounts will deactivate at 6:00 p.m. tomorrow, 6 o'clock, Christmas Eve, the exact hour they'd be sitting down to dinner." I typed back, "Thank you, Paul. You've been thorough," he replied, "Merry Christmas, Olivia. I hope it brings you peace." Peace. I smiled faintly. That word had been tainted for years, used as a weapon, a command to be quiet. But tonight it meant something different. It meant space. It meant truth. I shut the laptop and turned off the lights, leaving only the small lamp in the corner glowing gold. The room looked warm, almost gentle, even as the storm gathered outside. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the wind. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for my phone and opened my photo gallery. There they were, pictures from years of holidays past. My mother's house gleaming with garlands, Emily holding wine glasses, me half smiling in the corner of every frame. The invisible one, the dependable one. I deleted the entire album. The phone asked, "Delete 278 items permanently." Yes. When the screen went blank, I felt something close in me finally unclench. I made another cup of coffee, though it was long past midnight. As the machine hissed softly, I whispered, "They wanted a Christmas without me. They'll have it." The next hour passed in slow, meticulous quiet. I rechecked every confirmation email, saved backups to my drive, and filed them under a new folder, Final Proof. Each document slid into place with a satisfying click. When I finished, I poured the coffee and stood by the window again. The city was hushed under the weight of the storm. In the distance, faint church bells began to toll midnight. Their echo trembled through the night air. I imagined the house on Willow Ridge, its tall windows, glowing laughter, spilling through the halls. I could almost see them, unaware of the wires tightening beneath their comfort. The irony wasn't cruel, it was clean. I wasn't taking something from them. I was just stepping back from the fire I'd been feeding. A notification appeared on my phone, utility suspension scheduled. Confirmation code 4E27F. Effective December 24th, 6:00 p.m. I stared at it until the light dimmed. The message felt like a heartbeat syncing with mine. When I finally went to bed, the wind was howling harder. I left the curtains open, watching the snow whip against the glass. It was fierce but beautiful, wild but rhythmic. I fell asleep to its steady percussion. When morning came, the world outside was white and new. My apartment glowed pale with the reflection of the snow. I brewed coffee and opened my notebook again. December 24th. The accounts are frozen. The law stands on my side. The rest is silence. I closed it and ran my fingers along the cover. At 5:45 that evening, I lit a single candle. Its flame flickered against the window as dusk fell. My phone buzzed again, Paul's reminder, all confirmed. "Merry Christmas, Olivia." I set the phone down beside the candle. The clock ticked towards 6. Outside, the sky deepened to navy snow, falling in soft, endless patterns. I took a sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. When the clock struck 6, I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Somewhere up on that mountain, lights were going out, systems shutting down, payments bouncing. Somewhere my mother was realizing that her version of peace had always been built on someone else's silence. And somewhere between the darkness of that house and the calm of my apartment, balance returned. I whispered into the quiet, justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive on time. Then I blew out the candle, leaving the room wrapped in the soft glow of evening. The snow kept falling steady and sure, covering everything equally, like mercy and consequence arriving hand in hand. Christmas Eve began with the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. The city streets outside were nearly empty, blanketed in pale snow that softened every sound. From my window, I could see the faint glow of holiday lights blinking across balconies, the occasional car sliding carefully over the icy road. Inside my apartment, the world was still. The radiator hummed. My coffee steamed on the table. For the first time in years, there was no rush, no list, no obligation to anyone but myself. I sat for a long time at the window, hands wrapped around my mug, watching the sun rise weakly over the rooftops. The sky was a pale gray like paper waiting for a story. My mind was calm in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost sacred. Every decision had already been made. The documents were filed, the accounts frozen, the ownership sealed. There was nothing left to fix, nothing to fear. I turned on the small radio in the kitchen. A low, warm voice sang a carol from the 50s, soft and crackling through the static. The sound filled the room gently like breath. I started to hum along, not because I felt festive, but because the melody reminded me of being a child back when Christmas meant safety, before it turned into a battlefield of control. By late morning, the notifications started coming in. One from the electric company's service suspension, confirmed effective 6:00 p.m. Another from the gas provider, account on hold, per primary request. And then the mortgage alert, payment freeze authorized. Legal processing complete. I scrolled through each message slowly, reading the words with deliberate calm. It was strange how official language could sound so sterile while carrying the weight of justice. I saved each email into the final proof folder, then closed the laptop. The day unfolded gently. I cooked scrambled eggs, made tea, cleaned the counter. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Mrs. Grant stood there again, holding a small plate covered in foil. "Apple pie," she said, smiling softly. "It's Christmas Eve, after all. No one should go without something sweet." I invited her in. We sat at the table, the pie warm between us, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. "Any plans tonight?" she asked. "Not really," I said. "Just quiet." She nodded as if that was the best answer possible. Quiet's underrated. People fill silence with noise so they don't have to feel what's real. We talked for a while about her grandkids in Oregon, about the snowstorm that might last through morning. Before leaving, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Peace looks good on you," she said again, her eyes kind. After she left, I cut another small slice of pie and ate it slowly. The sweetness lingered, grounding me. By mid-afternoon, the light outside had turned golden. I pulled on my coat and went for a walk. The sidewalks were slick, but the air was crisp and clean. Most shops were closed, their windows filled with decorations that glowed against the fading light. I passed a church, where a choir was rehearsing inside, their voices rising faintly through the stained glass. The harmony carried across the empty street, haunting and beautiful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of the storm. When I returned home, the sky had darkened to blue-gray. I turned on my lamp, lit a single candle, and sat back down by the window. My phone buzzed with a new notification, an update from social media. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Emily had posted a video. The caption read, "Christmas Eve at Mom's, our favorite tradition." The video opened with the familiar dining room glowing with golden lights. The chandelier I'd chosen shone brightly above a long table covered in red and white linens. Guests laughed in the background, raising glasses of wine. My mother stood near the tree, her hand resting proudly on Emily's shoulder as they smiled for the camera. For a moment, I just watched in silence. The picture was perfect, almost painfully so. Then I caught something, an object just out of frame, familiar but unnoticed by most. The edge of the silver bowl I'd given her years ago, The one she'd claimed was too fancy for daily use. There it was, center of the table. My gift, my taste, my invisible presence woven into their celebration. I closed the app and set the phone down gently. I wasn't angry, just quietly certain they could keep the things I gave them. The meaning had already been reclaimed. The clock read 5:30 p.m. The world outside was sinking into dusk. I poured myself a cup of tea, lit another candle, and pulled the blanket over my lap. The radio played faintly Bing Crosby, now low and familiar. The rhythm of the moment felt almost ceremonial. 30 minutes. That's all that remained. I checked my email once more. A final message from Paul waited at the top. All actions are active. Accounts confirmed. Merry Christmas, Olivia. I read it twice, then placed my phone face down beside the candle. Outside, the snow began again, heavier this time. The streetlights flickered through the curtain of white, turning everything soft and unreal. I leaned back, letting my gaze blur against the glass. 6 o'clock. Somewhere far from here, their house was glowing with warmth and laughter. Guests were raising glasses, carols were playing, the oven was humming. Then, slowly, inevitably, the lights would flicker once, twice, then go dark. I didn't need to see it. I could feel the moment in the air, the way a storm feels just before it breaks. The silence inside my apartment shifted. It wasn't heavy, it was absolute. I sipped my tea, the steam fogging my glasses, and whispered to no one. Let it all go dark. My phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't look. The sound repeated, vibrating against the wood of the table. Messages piling up, each one carrying panic from miles away. I let them come untouched, unread. Instead, I stared at the candlelight, reflecting in the window, the flames steady and calm. The faint sound of laughter from a neighboring apartment drifted through the wall. Somewhere, a child's voice shouted with joy. Life kept going. At 6:10, the phone finally went still. The silence that followed was deeper, softer, and infinitely more honest. I stood and walked to the window, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Across the street, the world glowed in tones of amber and white. I could see a couple walking hand in hand, their footprints trailing behind them in perfect symmetry. The sight made me smile. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispered through power lines and empty bank ledgers. Sometimes it arrived in silence. I blew out the candle and let the room fall into darkness. The last trace of light flickered once before vanishing, leaving only the soft hum of the heater and the wind outside. This wasn't revenge, I thought. It was equilibrium. The lights of the city shimmered faintly through the frost on my window. I pressed my fingertips to the glass, feeling the chill seep into my skin, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't need to be seen, understood, or forgiven. The world could think what it wanted. The people who had erased me could sit in the dark and wonder. Peace didn't mean forgetting. It meant no longer flinching when you remembered. I turned from the window and let the quiet swallow everything. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled, the candle smoke curling into the air like a ribbon. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, beautiful. And in the center of that stillness, I finally exhaled. Laughter echoed through the Martin house, spilling from the dining room to the decorated hallway. The chandelier above the table glimmered, throwing warm light over crystal glasses and gold-trimmed plates. Diana moved between guests, with her familiar poise topping off wine glasses, her smile firm and practiced. Emily filmed short clips for her social media candles, flickering carols in the background, their mother in the center of it all. "Merry Christmas Eve, everyone," she said into the camera. Love, family, and gratitude. Outside, the wind howled faintly against the windows, unnoticed, under the hum of conversation. The fireplace crackled. It was by all appearances perfect. Then, at 6:04 p.m., the lights flickered. It was subtle at first, a blink so quick that most people laughed it off. "Must be the storm," someone said. Diana waved a hand dismissively. "Old house wiring. It happens every year. The guests returned to their chatter. But a minute later, the lights dimmed again. The chandelier buzzed, then went black. The house plunged into darkness. Gasps erupted, followed by awkward laughter. Someone joked, "Guess we'll have dinner by candlelight." Emily opened her phone using the screen as a flashlight. "Mom, the Wi-Fi's down too," Diana frowned. "Nonsense. Check the router." Emily crossed to the corner, crouching near the blinking box. "It's dead." She stood brushing her hands on her dress. "And my cell signal's gone weird." In the kitchen, one of the caterers stepped forward. "Mrs. Martin, the payment for the second half just declined. Could you try another card?" What Diana's voice sharpened. "That's impossible." The caterer handed her the small reader. Diana tried again. The screen blinked, "Red payment denied." The chatter around them quieted. Emily reached for her mother's phone. "Let me check your banking app." She tapped a few times, then froze. "Mom, it says the account is frozen." Diana snatched the phone from her hand, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. That can't be right. One by one, the small signs of control began to slip away. The electric stove beeped and powered down. The music stopped mid-song. The heating system clicked off. The guests shifted in their seats, murmuring. "What's going on?" a neighbor whispered. "I don't know," Diana said, her voice too loud now, too brittle. "It's just a technical issue." But then the doorbell rang. Everyone turned. At the front door stood two men. One in a thick navy coat with the North Peak Bank logo embroidered on the pocket, the other in uniform, a sheriff's badge glinting under the porch light. The wind howled behind them, scattering snow into the entryway when the door opened. "Mrs. Diana Martin?" the banker asked. Diana's throat went dry. "Yes," he held out an envelope. "We're here to deliver formal notice of repossession for the property at 215 Willow Ridge Drive. Filed and confirmed under the authority of the primary title holder, Miss Olivia Martin." For a moment the room froze. Someone dropped a fork. "What did you just say?" "The property is owned solely by Olivia Martin," he repeated calmly. "Effective immediately, this house is under her legal control." The sheriff stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "You and your guests are required to vacate within 24 hours, ma'am." Emily stood behind her mother, pale. "There has to be a mistake," she whispered. "Olivia gave us this house." The banker shook his head. "No, ma'am, she paid for it. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the guests. Some stood awkwardly collecting coats. The air felt colder, heavier. The once perfect dining table now looked like a stage after the curtain had fallen. Diana's hands trembled as she gripped the back of a chair. She wouldn't do this to us. But even as she said it, she remembered Olivia's quiet eyes, the way her daughter had looked the last time they spoke. The certainty there, the finality. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees. The house, so bright and proud minutes ago, was now dark against the snow. In the far corner, one of the guests whispered, "Didn't she always say Olivia handled the bills?" Another nodded. Guess that was true. Emily's phone buzzed suddenly. She looked down. A message from an unknown number glowed on the screen. "You wanted a Christmas without me. Now you have it." Her breath caught. She showed it to her mother. Diana stared at the words, her heart pounding in her chest. "Get out," she whispered, but not to Olivia, just to the panic rising inside her. She grabbed her phone, dialing frantically. Straight to voicemail. "Olivia," she said when the tone beeped. "You've made your point. Please, this is cruel. People are here. You're humiliating us." Her voice cracked on the last word. The sheriff's voice was calm but final. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to start clearing the property tonight." Emily turned to the guests. "I'm sorry. Maybe you should go." Chairs scraped against the floor. Shoes shuffled. One by one, people left. Some offered sympathetic looks, others avoided eye contact altogether. Within 10 minutes, the laughter, the music, the warmth, all of it was gone. The banker handed Diana a final paper. "This copy's for you. If you have any questions, contact your attorney." When the door closed, the silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the faint crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. Emily stood by the window, staring out into the night. Snow fell thick and silent. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Diana sank into a chair, her hands shaking in her lap. "She's my daughter," she said, as if trying to convince herself. She wouldn't leave us with nothing. But deep down, she knew Olivia wouldn't call. Not this time. Across town, I sat in my apartment, the same quiet surrounding me. My phone buzzed once on the table. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. Through the window, the world was soft and white. The candle I'd lit earlier burned low, its flame, small but steady. They'd called me too negative, too cold, too serious. Maybe they were right. Cold didn't waver. Cold didn't beg. Cold stayed calm when everything else burned. Another message arrived, the preview flashing on my screen, Mom's crying. "What did you do?" I looked at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Exactly what you taught me, to stay quiet and handle everything." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured another cup of tea and walked to the window. The city below glowed with Christmas lights, tiny fragments of warmth scattered across the night. I pressed my fingertips against the cold glass and let the silence hum through me. At 7:12 p.m., another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. The bank and police came. Everyone saw. "Are you happy now?" I smiled faintly. Not out of joy, but out of release. Happiness wasn't the goal. Truth was, I whispered. "You erased me quietly. I returned the favor." The phone buzzed again, but I let it go dark. The clock ticked softly in the background. Somewhere up in that dark house, my mother was realizing what silence really sounded like when it wasn't hers. Outside, snow kept falling in calm, endless rhythm. The lights in my apartment glowed warm and steady, and as the night stretched on, I felt the last thread between us finally snap, not with anger, but with certainty. Justice didn't need applause, it only needed time. And tonight, time was on my side. The next morning, sunlight broke across the city like it didn't know what had happened the night before. The snow outside glittered clean and new, erasing the tracks of the storm. I woke slowly, the apartment quiet except for the steady hum of the heater. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, buzzing occasionally, with leftover messages from people I no longer felt any obligation to answer. I reached for it only after finishing my coffee. The first thing I saw was the headline. "Local philanthropist steps down amid financial inquiry." The photo beneath it showed my mother, her smile, brittle eyes lowered. The article described her as a once-celebrated figure in the community, now under review after documentation revealed inconsistencies in property and donation records. There, it was clean, impersonal, and devastating. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I set the phone down and stared out the window. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with faint clouds. Down on the street, a group of children dragged sleds toward the hill near the park. Their laughter rose faintly through the glass. The world was already moving on. Another notification appeared, a text from Paul. The repossession was completed officially this morning. Bank confirmed all accounts are cleared under your name. Congratulations, Olivia. I typed back, "Thank you, Paul. I appreciate everything," he replied a moment later. "You don't owe them or anyone an explanation. The record speaks for itself." I smiled, small but real. That's the point, isn't it? To finally let the record speak. I spent the next hour cleaning my kitchen, not because it needed it, but because the motion helped me think. Every movement, wiping the counter, rinsing a glass, felt deliberate grounding. The same hands that had written checks and balanced bills were now making peace with silence. Around noon, I opened my laptop. My inbox was filled with messages. Most were from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "We had no idea. Your mother's heartbroken. Maybe it's time you talked." I scrolled through them slowly, then selected all and pressed delete. The empty screen felt like oxygen. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Grant" stood outside, her cheeks pink from the cold, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She carried a small thermos and 2 cups. Soup again? I asked, smiling. Always, she said. It's good for both kinds of healing body and heart. We sat by the window sipping slowly. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. You've been quiet lately. Quieter than usual. I think I've just run out of words, I said. She nodded. That's how it starts. When the noise stops, you finally hear what peace sounds like. We talked for a while about small things, her garden, the stubborn winter roses that refused to bloom this year, a neighbor's dog who kept escaping the yard. Normal things. Ordinary. But every word felt like an anchor. When she left, I stayed at the window. The street below glowed with the low winter sun. I could see the reflection of myself in the glass, no longer someone waiting for permission to exist. The next buzz on my phone came from an unfamiliar number. A reporter from the Durham Times wanted a statement. Sources confirmed the property documents list you as sole title holder. Would you like to comment? I replied. Simply, all documents are accurate. I have no further comment. Minutes later, the article updated online. Documents confirm ownership transfer to Olivia Martin. There was no speculation, no drama, just fact. The kind of truth that didn't shout, didn't need to. I closed the laptop and made another cup of tea. The aroma of lemon and honey filled the air. By mid-afternoon, Emily called. I let it ring out, but her voicemail followed quickly. Liv, please, Mom's not talking to anyone. She's barely eating. You've proved your point. Isn't this enough? I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there suspended in digital purgatory. Later, I took a drive through the city. The streets were clearer now, though patches of ice still clung to the edges. I stopped at a red light near Willow Ridge. For a moment, I could see the turnoff that led up to the house. I didn't follow it. I didn't need to see it again, but curiosity tugged at me. I parked near the base of the hill and walked up slowly, boots crunching through the snow. The house appeared through the trees, smaller, somehow, without its lights. The front gate hung slightly open. A notice was posted on the door, a printed sheet with the county seal. Repossession complete. Property under review. Through the window, I could see the living room. The chandelier still hung above the table, but everything else looked bare, hollowed out. The air inside seemed colder, the silence deeper. I stood there a long time, my breath clouding in front of me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. This used to be everything, I murmured. Now it's just a house. A single bird darted across the sky, its wings cutting through the pale light. I turned back down the hill, leaving the house behind. By the time I returned home, dusk had fallen. The apartment was warm, the faint smell of Mrs. Grant's soup still hanging in the air. I changed into an old sweater and sat on the couch with my laptop. The Charlotte Chronicle had published another article. The headline read, Community expresses shock after Martin family scandal. I scrolled past the comments, not interested in their sympathy or their judgment. The phone buzzed again this time, Paul. Just letting you know the property tax file has been closed. You're completely released from liability. Everything's officially over. Over, I repeated softly, as if testing the word. It felt strange, almost foreign. I'd spent so many years waiting for things to fall apart, and now that they finally had, there was nothing left to brace for. That night, I opened my notebook. The previous entry still read, the rest is silence. I turned the page and wrote today. Silence sounded like justice. I set the pen down, leaned back, and listened to the hum of the city below. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Somewhere, a car horn blared. Life, as it always does, was moving forward. In the corner, my phone buzzed again, one final message. It was from an unknown number. You won. Congratulations.